Imagine a small campsite of prehistoric people. One person in the group sneaks away with the communal food share of the whole community. The next day, everyone finds out. The food has been completely eaten by him. It cannot be taken back. A person stands up, intending to raise a fist to punish the thief. But let us stop for a moment. Why must there be punishment? Beating him to a pulp does not magically make the pile of food return. Chasing him away also cannot restore the meal of yesterday. Furthermore, the act of punishing also carries an extremely huge risk. The violator can absolutely return to take revenge on the person who acted. Punishing someone can consume even more resources after the resources have already been actually lost. Your group just lost 10 portions of food. If you punish the thief, your group will have to lose more time, energy, and accept the risk of physical injury. Why do we have to pay the price twice? Why would humanity do such an irrational thing? And the answer to this paradox might explain one of the most important secrets, which allows thousands of strangers today to still live peacefully in the same society. Why did humans start punishing criminals? Right from the beginning, we need to shatter a misconception. Do not bring the modern criminal code back to the Stone Age. A prehistoric community absolutely did not have a criminal code. There were no prosecutors, there were no police, and there were certainly no prison sentences. But that community still had clear expectations: how to share food, not being allowed to take the belongings of others, who is allowed to marry whom, what the obligations to the group are, and how to handle violence. A cross-cultural study on 131 non-industrial societies discovered countless forms of punishment for those who violate norms, from reputational punishment, material punishment, physical punishment, to execution. More importantly, the type of punishment changes very strongly depending on the social and economic context, showing that there never existed a single punishment system of primitive humans. The truth is, humanity punished those who broke the rules long before societies invented a legal concept called a criminal. And the first punishment might not have required touching a single hair of the violator. Imagine a small group. A hunter always takes the best cut of meat, but never shares with anyone. You do not necessarily have to beat him up. You can use gossip, refuse to share food, stop cooperating, ridicule him, destroy his reputation, and finally, isolate him from the community. Cross-cultural research categorizes reputational punishment as a separate category and shows that these types of punishments appear in many societies. That study also discovered that reputational punishments have a strong connection with egalitarian social organization and the absence of food storage. In a society where life and death rely on cooperation, reputation itself is the most terrifying weapon. But why is reputation so effective? A person living alone deep in the forest might not need to care about what other people think. But in a small group, you depend entirely on those around you to hunt, share food, care for children, protect your safety, gather information, and build alliances. If cheating today makes everyone refuse to cooperate with you tomorrow, then the short-term benefit has turned into an incredibly terrible long-term cost. You steal food today, you are given 5 points. But you lose cooperation tomorrow, you are deducted 50 points. That is a deadly trade-off. However, reputation only works effectively if everyone knows what you did. What happens when the harm is more serious, or the victim does not just want to stop at gossiping? Revenge, the most dangerous form of punishment of humanity. One person injures another person. The victim, or the family of the victim, retaliates. This has its own survival logic. If I do not respond, other people will think they can do the same thing to my family. Punishment can create a powerful deterrent signal. If you attack me, you will have to pay the price. But there is a huge trouble. Person A hurts Person B. Person B retaliates against Person A. The relatives of Person A then come to retaliate against the family of Person B. A bloody loop begins. Harm, revenge, counter-revenge, new harm, then new revenge again. Punishment can stop conflicts, but making mistakes in the method of punishment can also continuously reproduce conflicts. This is exactly the reason why another mechanism became vital. That is, compensation. Punishment does not always mean making the violator taste the pain. When hearing the word punishment, modern people often immediately think of imprisonment, fines, or execution. But in many small-scale justice systems, punishment can include the transfer of resources from the offender to the victim or their family. A study in the year 2023 analyzing societies such as the Kiowa, Mentawai, and Nuer suggested that punitive justice in these systems does not just enforce group norms, but can also restore reciprocal cooperation and prevent conflicts from continuing to escalate. Compensation emerges as an extremely important feature in many ethnographic justice systems. The offender loses 5 cows. If those 5 cows disappear or are killed, that is purely a loss. But if those 5 cows are transferred to the family of the victim, it becomes punishment combined with repair. Sometimes, punishment is not about hurting the violator, but about making the relationship between the two parties survivable. But right here, we face one of the biggest evolutionary mysteries. Why do completely unrelated people step up to punish? Person A steals from Person B. Person C stands watching and loses absolutely nothing. So why does Person C spend time, accept the risk of retaliation, and spend resources just to punish Person A? This is called third-party punishment. Humans in laboratory experiments are willing to punish those who violate social norms even when they themselves are not the victims. This is one of the behaviors that makes evolutionary researchers particularly interested in human norm enforcement. Why does the third person not just ignore it and move on, but steps forward to intervene? One of the fascinating explanations is this. The punisher might also be sending a message about themselves. Punishing cheaters shows everyone around that I will not tolerate deception. This can make the person carrying out the punishment perceived by the community as a trustworthy partner. A study in the Nature journal in the year 2016 showed that third-party punishment can act as a costly signal of trustworthiness. People who are willing to suffer losses to punish wrongdoing can receive massive benefits in reputation. Punishing one person can teach everyone else about what kind of group they are living in. Of course, this is not the only explanation for the evolution of punishment. Other models emphasize group structure, repeated interactions, cultural norms, and institutions. The evolution of costly punishment remains a very hot topic in social science. However, this is the greatest function of punishment. Punishment makes the rule become real. Imagine there is a rule. Do not steal. If a thief steals and nothing happens, then that rule is just a useless suggestion. But if the whole group consistently responds, that rule becomes an incredibly costly thing to violate. A rule plus unexpected punishment equals a much stronger incentive to comply. Punishment, therefore, is not only directed at the current offender, it sends a warning message to all potential future offenders. But how harsh must the punishment be for deterrence to work? We often think that the heavier the punishment, the more effective it is. Keep that thought for the end of the story. Do not tell the history of punishment as a ladder going from gossip, fines, beatings, and then gradually progressing up to execution. The cross-cultural study on 131 societies did not find such a simple, linear trajectory at all. Punishment systems change relatively quickly in cultural history and are closely related to socio-ecological organization. In the research sample, reputational punishment is linked to egalitarianism, material punishment is linked to food storage, and execution has a moderate association with social class stratification. Humanity did not evolve a single punishment system. Cultures continuously redesign forms of punishment for completely different problems, and as societies became larger, punishment turned into a profession. In a group of 30 people, the community can directly handle the violator. But in a city of 30,000 people, the network is far too massive. You need specialized people or institutions to investigate, issue verdicts, and enforce them. Evolutionary models show that enforcement by specialized third parties can help maintain cooperation between people who do not have enough information or repeated direct relationships. But the appearance of specialized enforcers creates a new problem. Who will control the people who have the right to punish? This is exactly the turning point moment, when the wrongdoer gradually becomes a criminal. In private revenge, person A harms person B. The problem only lies between person A and person B. But in formal criminal justice, person A harms person B, and the authority has the right to declare that. You did not only hurt person B, you violated the order of this entire community. At this point, the problem becomes person A against society, or the state. Ancient legal history shows that criminal matters were increasingly handled by public authorities, instead of relying entirely on self-help or personal revenge. This is where the category of crime becomes extremely important. The offender is no longer just the person who harmed me, but rather the person who violated a rule recognized by the public. Around 2,050 years before Christ, the law collection of Ur-Nammu in Mesopotamia already included both capital punishments for some crimes and monetary compensation for bodily injury. A few centuries later, the collection of Hammurabi, around the year 1750 before Christ, became more famous, with a mixture of fines, restitution, corporal punishment, death penalties, and punishments dependent on social status. Do not fall into the mythical trap that ancient law was purely an eye for an eye. Right in ancient Mesopotamia, there existed countless diverse forms of punishment. The Louvre Museum emphasizes that the Hammurabi Stele was not a complete criminal code in the modern sense, but a collection of hundreds of legal judgments covering everything from family, property, labor, to commerce. And the truth is, an eye for an eye might be less barbaric than we imagine. When hearing the phrase, an eye for an eye, we often shudder and exclaim, how brutal. But there is a very important conceptual interpretation. An eye for an eye actually sets a limit. If you blind another person in one eye, you are not allowed to kill their entire family. The punishment must be proportional to the wrongdoing. Recent Cambridge University scholarship on the history of capital punishment emphasizes the eye for an eye principle of Hammurabi as a way to control private vengeance, concentrate the power to punish into a legitimate authority, and simultaneously introduce the principle of proportionality. Of course, Hammurabi did not create equality. Punishments still depended deeply on social status. Ancient punishment could be proportional in one dimension while simultaneously being extremely unequal in another dimension. Why were punishments in ancient times and the Middle Ages often held publicly in town squares? Public punishment carries a massive communication advantage. If the punishment only takes place in a closed room between the authorities and the violator, only one person learns the lesson. If the entire town witnesses it, 500 people will receive the message. Public punishment can shame the violator, communicate the rules, demonstrate the authority of the state, and attempt deterrence. But we should not reconstruct the past into a horrifying panoramic film of torture. Research on Western and Central Europe from the year 1400 to the year 1600 notes that sensational images often exaggerate the prevalence of torture and executions. Fines, banishment, and short-term detention were often far more common than the spectacular public executions that popular history likes to remember. History often remembers spectacular punishments, precisely because ordinary punishments were far less spectacular. At this point, a historical reversal will surprise you. The prison is not the natural method of punishment of human society. We modern people assume that committing a crime means going to prison. But in many historical systems, the prison was primarily just a place to hold a person before trial or punishment, and the act of imprisonment itself was not yet the main penalty. In the English legal tradition, scholars note that before the late 18th century, imprisonment often played the role of detention. Actual punishments could be fines, whipping, branding, transportation, or execution. The Penitentiary Act of the year 1779 was an important turning point in turning confinement, hard labor, discipline, and reform into an official punishment in Britain. For most of human history, locking someone inside a room for 10 years would have been seen as an incredibly expensive and absurd way to punish them. So, perhaps punishment does not need to be more painful. It needs to be more certain. In the year 1764, the thinker Cesare Beccaria directly attacked a familiar logic. He rejected the idea that harsher punishments would lead to less crime. Beccaria argued that the purpose of punishment is not to torment the violator or reverse the crime that already happened. The goal should be to prevent the violator from causing new harm and to deter other people. One of his most famous statements is this: "The certainty of a mild punishment can create a much stronger deterrent than a terrifying punishment that is easily avoided." Modern deterrence research still warns that criminal policies are often too focused on severity while ignoring certainty, context, as well as the rewards and costs surrounding the act of committing a crime. Today, the criminal punishment system still contains countless conflicting philosophies. Punishment because you deserve to face the consequences. Punishment to deter future criminals. Punishment to isolate dangerous individuals. Punishment to rehabilitate behavior. Or punishment for restitution and to restore the community. Sometimes these goals directly contradict each other. An extremely long prison sentence might satisfy the need for retribution and incapacitation, but does not necessarily maximize rehabilitation. A restorative settlement might repair the relationship, but fails to soothe the thirst for revenge. Humanity did not discover what punishment is used for. In reality, we have been debating that question for thousands of years. Ultimately, why did humanity start punishing criminals? Let us return to the food thief at the beginning of the story. That pile of food will never come back. So, punishment is not really directed at the past. It is directed at the next meal. It is directed at the next transaction. It is directed at the next people who are sparking the intention to cheat. And directed at the next conflicts, so that they do not turn into bloody acts of revenge. Humanity probably started punishing those who break the rules because community groups needed a way to make cooperation safer, to send a signal about which behaviors are unacceptable, to repair fractured relationships, and to prevent repeated harm. As societies grew larger, those informal sanctions gradually turned into courts, officials, and public criminal punishment systems. The strangest thing about humanity is not that we know how to take revenge. Many animal species also know how to retaliate. What is far stranger and more magnificent is that humans can declare to each other that. You did not directly harm me, but you broke our common rules. Therefore, I will still be willing to suffer losses to punish you and stop you from doing that to other people." In that exact moment, when humanity started punishing strangers because they hurt other strangers, punishment was no longer just revenge. It transformed into a tool to defend the very soul of a society.